I'm Scott Stokely, and you are listening to the Zen Disc Golf Podcast.
Hello, friends, and welcome to episode number 2 of the new Zen Disc Golf Podcast. Today, I have an incredible opening guest who I've spent a little time getting to know digitally, and I think you'll love hearing my conversation with professional disc golfer Scott Stokely. If you haven't checked it out already, this podcast is actually part 2 of my conversation with Scott. Part 1 was actually episode number 10 of his podcast, so go check that out on Scott's channel. I'll link it in the description. But before we get started, I just wanted to take a minute and say thank you to all those folks who just shared their excitement with me that this podcast was coming back. I'm committed to bringing you excellent content, and I can't wait for you to hear and see this time, because we are a video cast now, what I have in store for you. If you'd like to help support the Zen Disc Golf Podcast, there is a couple ways that can help me immensely. First is subscribing to this podcast wherever you're consuming it, whether it's on AudioCast on Apple or Spotify, but also make sure that you're subscribing on the YouTube channel. And this is double powerful. We've become a YouTube world, and likes and subscribes for these videos make sure that more people can see them, and so that we can carry on and be strong. And the next way you can support this cast is by purchasing my books and other super cool apparel and merchandise. You can find all of my books on Amazon using the links I'll provide in this description, and the certified fresh ZDG apparel on the zendiscgolf.com. Now, my guest is a Guinness Book World Record holder for both backhand and forehand throws. He's a 17-time world and national disc golf champion. He's a teacher, a speaker, a podcaster, an author. He is the man, the myth, the legend, the infamous Scott Stokely. Good afternoon, Scott. Do you want to pretend that we haven't been talking to each other for the past hour?
Sure, I'll pretend.
We'll pretend.
How would I know? We weren't talking.
But so you and I have been talking for the past hour. So this is really kind of a part 2 of the podcast. If you all want to hear part 1 of the podcast, you need to go over to Scott Stokely's. Do you want to send them to YouTube? Is that where you want to send them? Go to Scott Stokely's YouTube and watch part 1. And then this is just a continuation of that. So Scott, it is a pleasure and a privilege and an honor to have you on episode 2. I feel like, over the last hour and then over Christmas and then the phone call that we had, we've gotten to know each other pretty well. And hopefully we're developing a good friendship and a relationship based on disc golf, among other things, which we'll probably talk about. But I want everybody to know, because a lot of the new kids on the block don't know Scott Stokely the way some of our older, and I'm not even from the old school.
Go ahead and paint that nicely. I challenge you.
Do what now?
Go ahead and try to paint that in a nice light.
No, it's good to be old school. And man, I tell you what, I've been reading your book, and I encourage everybody to go out and buy this book, Scott Stokely, Growing Up Disc Golf. And the way I found this book was I was putting out my own book this year, and I was looking to see who else had a disc golf book out that I hadn't seen yet. And I said, oh, Scott's got one out. That's awesome, because I've been following you for a while. And I went to your website. I took a look at what you had going on, what you were doing, and I emailed you very quickly and said, we have to do a show together. And I was really just inviting you on mine, but you invited me on yours. And so this is great. But I've been reading your book, and oh my gosh. So I hope you forgive me with the metaphor that I'm getting ready to use. Please forgive me.
I will.
As I'm reading this book, I'm envisioning a certain movie with Tom Hanks known as Forrest Gump, where he is everywhere at all of these big events in history. You know what I'm saying? That's you with disc golf. You are there at all of these points, from the first disc golf course in the United States to the time, the first real baskets went in the ground, to the time where the first real disc golf specific to the sport, discs were introduced. It reminds me of those scenes where it's just like, how is it possible that this dude was there at all of these different times? And so I want the people to hear your story.
Well, and actually what's funny is the difference between me and Forrest Gump is that when I started playing the sport, it was so small that we were all at all the events because there weren't that many of us.
Right.
So I wasn't that special in that regard. I mean, all the old timers, Dan Roddick was there for all these big events, and a number of people.
Sure, but we're talking to you tonight.
So I played my first round of disc golf when there was one disc golf course in the entire world. So I was there at ground zero, although I was about 7 years old at the time. So, or 6 or 7. So it's not like I was part of the sports history then. I just happened to live down the street. I didn't become an everyday player active in the Oak Grove Disc Golf Club for another 5 years after that. So I don't consider myself part of that generation because even though I was there, I was a little kid. I wasn't actually participating in it. But I did nothing but play disc golf as a youth. I dropped out of high school to play disc golf full time. And then I wound up being the 7th player to tour and to go out on the Pro Disc Golf Tour back in 1993, back when you could win a pretty decent sized tournament and take home $250.
Right.
And so it was a whole different world. It was the Wild West. The rules were just being written. I mean, the rules were being written as we went along. I mean, Carlton Howard from Raleigh actually was the biggest writer of the rules, but the game was just in its infancy. And so it was the Wild West. It was crazy back then.
There's an interesting part of your book because you're talking about the rules where you were involved in some rules that had already been on the books, but whether or not they were going to be enforced. And one of them was wearing a shirt.
Yes. Yeah. It was a PDJ rule that you had to wear a shirt at PDJ tournaments. No one followed it. And I say no one. I mean, you would have stick in the mud tournament directors. They would follow all these new rule thingies. And I think they were probably referred to as rule thingies more than rules. But shirts were optional at sanctioned events. And so we voted to make it the NorCal committee, the NorCal series, the series of 10 events run by Leonard Muse out of Berkeley. And we voted to make shirts mandatory at NorCal events. And It wasn't unanimous. There were tournament directors who voted nay.
I was going to say there was a lot of people who weren't happy about that, or at least some people that weren't happy about that. And that's an interesting thing I think about your story is that there's a lot of little pieces here that are, common today that, weren't so common back then and argued and controversial. And I think that's some interesting stuff that we can get into.
Well, the early days of a lot of sports were like that. I mean, if you look at the early days of baseball back, 150 years ago, if a kid went to his dad and said, hey, guess what? I get a chance to play professional baseball. I don't have to work in the coal mine. That kid would be bringing shame upon his family.
Oh, yeah.
Because coal mining was a respectable, honorable trade. Playing professional baseball was an embarrassment.
Yeah.
And, and then when players played, players would play with a flask of whiskey in their pocket. They would always slide on the right side because the whiskey was on the left side.
That's interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah. So those things would happen because that's what, that's the way it was. It was the early days. So our sport's no different. Our sport is just, it went through the same adolescent growing pains. The thing about disc golf is that and this is going to be hard to relate to if you're younger, but back in the 70s, which is really when the sport of Frisbee took off, the idea of alternative sports was a pretty foreign concept.
Okay.
Basically, you played sports as a kid. And then when you were, an adult, you watched sports. a very small, small number of kids would go on to play professional baseball or basketball or football or hockey up north. A few people played tennis and golfed, but that's it. Sports was something you watched, not something you did. Alternative sports, as much as anything, just means participation sports.
Right.
So what would happen is you had a lot of people out there, especially in the 70s, part of the counterculture movement, that had the same genetics that other professional athletes had. They had the same drive to compete. They still enjoyed sports, but they didn't want to cut their hair.
Okay.
And they
all right.
wanted to hang out with the jocks because they would get beat up by the jocks. And so what did those people do? Well, they would play Frisbee, they would skateboard, they would surf, but they were just as talented and athletic as the professional athletes, but they didn't fit into the mainstream. So that's the origin of our sport. Is not everybody, obviously, but it was a counterculture movement. It was athletics for those people who didn't fit in. The punk rock crowd would play, they were the skaters, and the hippie crowd was the Frisbee players. And that's where we started.
Right on. And so at what point did you say, this is what I want to do for my life? This is what I want to, this is what I want to start doing to make an income. And
yeah,
that's it.
So basically, from the day I started playing, that's what I wanted to do, but it doesn't mean I ever thought it was feasible.
Sure.
And sometime around the 80s, a player by the name of Glenn Whitlock went out and toured. He was the first player to tour.
Right.
And he was hitchhiking from town to town. He was, the funny story about Glenn is he was a professional eater.
Yeah, I was reading about that in your book, and that, like I said, I couldn't put it down.
Yeah, so I'm very good. Actually, I talked to Glenn just a couple of days ago. He's from Vancouver, or British Columbia. And the thing about Glenn is that the way he survived on the road, well, first was by hitchhiking, and the second was he had a rule that he would only eat at fast food restaurants, but they had to cost less than $1 per plate. So his rule of thumb was, if they just served one thing like pizza or pasta, $6 is about the most he could spend, because he could only really get down 6 plates of pasta. But if it was a buffet that had some variety, like a sizzler or something,
yeah,
he could eat 9 or 10 full plates of food.
Mm-hmm.
So for $10, he could do that, which meant he could win $125 or $150 a week and live off that.
Yeah, he would fuel up on that, then go play for a couple of days, huh?
Yes. And watching Glenn eat, it was just like if you tell someone you play disc golf and they say, oh, I got a buddy who's really, really good. And you're like, you don't understand what high level golf is. You don't even get it. That's the same thing when you talk about Glenn and someone says, oh, I got a buddy, you could out eat him.
Right.
No, Glenn's a professional. 10 plates of food at a sitting, we've all witnessed, all of Glenn's friends. It's a real thing. And so, yeah, that's how Glenn made his living. So that was the first word that somebody was making a living playing. And then across the early 90s, 6 other players, Dan Ginley, Steve Valencia, 5 other players, Dan Ginley, Steve Valencia, and then Jeff and Johnny Listerman and Mike Williams all toured. So 6 people had played. And so I knew there were people out there playing. And I was in college in California at the time. And I was working at Kinko's graveyard shift. I was in my 3rd semester of college. And I remember this moment. It's not in the book. This was one of the things I had to cut out about 50,000 words for this release.
Jeez.
And yeah, so there's going to be a re-release probably in a year with 50,000 words added back in. But I went to my boss, and I had earned a day off. It's one of those minimum wage jobs where, you work X number of hours, you earn a day off. So after 2 months, I earned a day off, and I had a tournament coming up in a couple months. And I asked my boss for a Friday off. And my boss just gave me the whole thing that happens at minimum wage or blue collar jobs, which is, what are we going to do? Mm-hmm. You've put me in this horrible position. How am I going to fill your spot? And made me feel guilty. And I'm next thing you know, I'm practically begging this guy I'm a grown man. I'm 20 years old. This is a grown man, probably in his late 20s. And I'm begging him for a day off. Finally, he gave it to me. And I remember walking away, and it hit me really quickly. I said, if I finish college, I'm going to be doing the exact same thing in 10 years. I'll just be being paid more money, right?
Right.
But it just hit me. I'm like, what is this idea that I'm going to ask another adult permission to do anything in my life? And since people had been out and toured, I said, I'm hitting the road.
Right.
I ought to do this thing. And my plan was still to come back and finish college. But then after I was on the road playing disc golf for a living for 3 months, and I'm talking bread and bologna sandwiches, sleeping in rest areas or on people's floors. I mean, it was scraping by. But after 3 months of doing this, putting food in my stomach, playing disc golf, I was like, uh-oh, now what do I do? How do I go back to not doing this? Now that I've done this, what am I going to do? Go back to college and get a job at a cubicle? I just played Frisbee for a living.
So Scott, you kind of came up with a new way of touring and trying to make money. You did a lot of merchandising and things like that. That's something that these players do today. They might take for granted, but you kind of pioneered some of that.
Yeah, so I was traveling with a partner. I was responsible for them. And I was, I felt more responsible because it wasn't just me. Like if I was going to be broke for a day, like who cares? But if you have a partner, that's a lot of stress and anxiety. And it's also not fair to them. So I started carrying merchandise while I traveled, the first touring player to do that. And I would set up a Tournament Central, but I would have custom shirts, socks, hats, different embroidered items, minis, discs, of course. And most of that stuff wasn't available. I mean, the vast majority of players pre-internet didn't have access to things like disc golf clothing.
Right.
Strange sounds. I would come to town. I would have the only disc golf shirts anybody had ever seen at some of these tournaments, aside from the tournament shirts they would make extras of.
Right. And you also, you made sure that it was kind of couth with the tournament directors and the powers that be to make sure, because you said that it could be seen as disrespectful to sell things from your trunk.
Yeah, that was a big rub that not everybody agreed, but I never felt it was okay to sell out of the trunk of your car at a tournament, because the tournament director and or club needed those disc sales to fund the tournament.
Right.
Oh,
So you don't want to compete.
Yeah, and it seemed like not fair. And just like I've never heard a tournament director say no to someone if they said, hey, do you mind if I sell a few discs? But a lot of people didn't ask. So that wasn't cool.
Oh.
So I was set up at Tournament Central, which meant that I had more exposure and I made a lot more money. I didn't pop open the trunk in my car and bring people over. I had a table full of merchandise and it worked well.
Right. And so you toured around for how long did you tour during this period in your life?
Off and on through a period of about 8 years.
Okay.
And I would take periodic breaks, and I would take breaks over the winter. I spent a number of years up where I snowboarded every winter. So I played Frisbee for 8 months and then snowboard for 4. It was awful.
Right. And you know what? I think it'd be interesting for the readers or the readers. That's an author thing. Yeah. They're listening now, aren't they?
Yeah.
So for the listeners to hear is something that I didn't know about, but I think it'd be neat for you to talk about. It's probably hard to talk about, but double disc court was something that you played and you had a big interest in. And I don't think anybody, maybe a very small percentage of people, know what double disc court is. You feel like going over that? Yeah,
I could do it. Sure. It's one of the flaws of the game is that it's hard to describe.
Right.
Google it, double disc court or DDC.
I had to look it up on YouTube and it was immediately entertaining.
So let's go back to a little bit of the history of the sport. So the sport there wasn't a sport of disc golf. It was a sport of Frisbee. Okay. And Frisbee was a brand name of Whammo, but Whammo dominated the flying disc market. So it became known as Frisbee. Same as aspirin and Kleenex are brand names, but we use them in common speak now, right? So that's what Frisbee was. And when Frisbee became a thing, nobody had figured out what games or sports were going to be popular. It's kind of like if somebody invented the first ball and said, go make up a sport with this. And you're going to have golf and billiards and basketball and football and croquet and polo and water polo. And right. So it's the same idea. Here's this plastic thing that flies differently than any ball. People started making up games. And so in the early days of competitions, the 60s, but especially the 70s, all the events were overall events. Okay. You went to a tournament, you played a wide range of different Frisbee games. Distance, maximum time aloft, how long you can keep the disc in the air and catch it. Freestyle, which is doing the tricks to the music. At some of the events, they would play a version of Ultimate, but that's a little different. It requires a lot more people, but there would be different games, like the game of Whizback had some popularity on the West Coast. But so different games came out, and one of those games was called Double Disc Court. And what Double Disc Court, in short, is you have two courts drawn out just with ropes on the ground, square, 13 meters in diameter, separated by 17 meters. So you got a square, a space 17 meters across, and another square. Two players in each court, two discs in play at the same time. And the way you score points is either you throw a shot that lands in the opponent's court, and when it does, if it lands and stays in the court, you get a point. If they throw a shot that at any point touches outside of your court, if it hits outside or if it hits inside and then rolls out, you also get a point. And if you can make the other team touch both discs at the same time, you get 2 points.
Yeah, that's where it kind of gets tricky, and when you're watching it, because they're doing like these tap maneuvers. So it's like I didn't touch it, or that's kind of what I perceived from it.
Yeah, so you would have a typical scenario. We can demonstrate a little bit by video. So there's two people on this side, two people on this side. Two discs are in play at one time. So each team's holding a disc. Based on who scored the last point, this team here has to throw first. So they throw, and right when the other person's about to catch the disc, this person here throws, so you're not touching it at the same time, a big, high, lofty.
Ah, yeah.
This person catches it, waits for it, and when it starts to come down, they throw a really hard shot that arrives
Gotcha.
Now, you're allowed to tip the disc, which means if the slow one comes in first, that person tips their disc up in the air, and while it's up in the air, the person catching the fast one catches it, throws it quick.
Gotcha.
Quick. You catch it and throw it. Or if that first one's coming in quicker, then the person playing the fast one can either try to tip it as well, which can be challenging because it's coming in super fast.
Sure.
And when they're doing that, the person playing the slow one is milking it all the way to the ground to give them time to make the play, or they can catch it and throw real quickly before you catch the disc.
Yeah, and this game has got to be super well orchestrated and strategy discussed before, and you just got to know your partner very well, I would think.
Well, you know your partner, but you also have one person on each team who is designated with making the call for both players and dictating what happens, because you can't both be doing the same thing or trying to communicate. One person's in charge of saying, you do this and I do that. We do this with very short words and symbols.
Oh, okay.
The person what to do. But then on top of that, there's rules regarding which way the disc is spinning when it hits the court, the angle it can strike the court, and then you're positioning players where you want them in the court when you're attacking. There's you're playing to your strengths, you're dictating the flow of play. It's a game that gets more and more intricate, and as it does, it becomes more and more fun.
Oh yeah, and I definitely recommend everybody go check this out on YouTube. Just search Double Disc Court. There's still some people playing it now. It's pretty neat to watch.
There are pods everywhere of players that play. Not everywhere, but we need new players, and that's the biggest challenge. It's the funnest Frisbee game in the world. It is my personal favorite game to play with the flying disc. If I'm just going out and playing for fun, I will play Double Disc Court.
I figured you'd like to talk about it.
Yeah. So it's the best. And, but new players, hey, every DDC, find a DDC, go to DDC, search for DDC. There's a website. If there is a DDC pod, they call them pods, it's a local club in your area, you are welcome to come out. They will teach you how to play, and they will beg you to come out next week after you come out the first week.
Nice.
Everybody invited, come give it a try.
Yeah, it looks so fun. But like you were saying, that's an important part. These Frisbee games, these original disc games were a very important part of the evolution. What I found really interesting about specifically the history of disc golf is as you wrote about your life, it's like paralleling with Frisbee and disc golf and disc sports in general. But one of the things that really caught me is watching the technology have to correspond to the other technologies in the game. For example, when the first courses were being developed, you had holes that were around 200 feet or so or less.
That was an average hole, that was a decent length for a Frisbee.
Yeah. And then you started having these other discs, and you said one was the wedge and then the other was the eagle. And they started developing the discs specific to disc golf that would fly a little bit longer, a little bit more distance, they had to start rethinking how they were going to make courses because they were too short.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so Ed Hedrick designed a lot of the early courses. And not only were there Frisbees, but Ed also had it in his mind. His course designing philosophy was every player should be able to reach every hole.
Okay.
He thought it would be less fun if they couldn't. So his idea was that the sport would be just a game of pitch and putt.
Okay.
He didn't envision par 72 courses. He didn't envision, he thought players wouldn't be interested in that type of play. And a lot of people disagreed because in ball golf, people like playing par 72s. They don't go out and play par 54s in ball golf just because they don't hit the ball hard. They'd still rather play a championship course. And
Right.
disc golf, same way. They enjoy challenges. So between the disc technology and Ed's philosophy, though, the courses were very short. The world's first course was 3,900 feet in length.
Mm-hmm.
That's my home course, by the way.
That was Oak Grove?
Oak Grove Park, yeah. So 160 per hole. That was the average.
Interestingly enough, Ed Hedrick designed the course that I grew up on, which was Bayville in Virginia Beach as well.
Okay.
So yeah, and it's, average hole 230, 240-ish,
That would be a course back then.
But yeah, it's so interesting. And then you start talking about how the discs would, we started off with pull holes, and then we moved to baskets, and getting the baskets to catch the discs was like the next hurdle.
Well, the first baskets had just one set of chains, and there was a total of 10 chains hanging down. And a 10-chain basket, if you've seen Ricky Wysocki putt,
right?
Watch Wysocki putt from 40 feet, and it is
Blast
not
it.
inspiration. 8 out of 10 of his putts, between 8 and 9 out of every 10 putts, would not stick in those baskets. It's just going to cut straight through. It doesn't stop. A golf disc, it's too small. It's just too heavy. So then they came up with this great idea. They said, well, let's make 12-chain baskets. And so now there's 12 chains instead of 10, which is, at the time, we were excited. We're like, that's fantastic. We loved going to 12-chain courses because that's way better than 10 chains.
Yeah.
But still awful, but they were the best thing on the market, period. So we loved it. And then someone came up with the idea of intersets of chains, but they didn't sell them as complete baskets. They sold them as kits.
Okay. So you had to update.
Yeah, you would have to go update your basket. But that was, I would say, the biggest leap in basket technology was going from a 4x4 post to the first pole hole. Clearly, that was the biggest leap. But probably the second biggest leap in technology was when we went from a 12-chain basket to adding an inner set of chains. Even though 12-chain baskets with an inner set of chains is not good. By the way, it was 6 chains. So you'd put them between 2 chains every other gap. So it wasn't even an inner set of 12 chains to fill every gap. It was every other gap.
Right.
But that was still, that was better. But you had to putt in those baskets. You had to putt up high with the nose down, and had to have the disc had to be going down when it hit.
Had to sort of be lobbed, huh?
Yeah. It's just, you didn't just choose what would be most likely to hit the sweet spot.
Okay.
You had to try to hit the sweet spot, but you had to do it in a way where the disc had a better chance of sticking. So that high lofting putt was less likely to hit the sweet spot, but it was so much more effective at sticking in the basket that you would choose that over drilling it. Like, you would never a putt. So a 15-foot putt was a missable putt. Even if you hit dead center, it could bounce out pretty easily.
Sure.
They were tough.
And as these courses were evolving, you know, guys like you were coming out and just throwing farther and farther and farther and doing world records. Tell us a little bit about when you, well, first of all, I think it's neat that you put the flag in for one of the first distance records. Tell me if I'm telling this right.
No, not one of the first. This is the first distance record set with a beveled edge disc.
Okay. All right.
So Schaefer and I were at the 1983 Nevada State Championships. I was 14 years old. It was my first out-of-state tournament, and he was a mentor growing up to me. And we went, they had a distance competition. Even then, the Nevada State Championships would have 3 events. It was a disc golf tournament, but of course you had distance and maximum time aloft, MTA. And the Eagle had just come out that Innova produced. The Eagle was the disc that revolutionized everything. As far as disc technology, the single biggest paradigm shift in the sport after the invention of the pole hole was the day the Eagle came out. The world changed. Okay. And so that was the first distance tournament when the Eagle was out. So the record was going to be set and it was going to be really windy. So we were out there marking, and Frank Aguilera, who was a local at my course, again, not that unusual when there was only 6 courses in Southern California, but he throws, it goes over our heads. We chase it down. I was a little bit faster than Rick. I got to the thing. I put the flag in the ground to mark that world record.
And you decided at that point that record was going to be yours one day.
Yeah, because all I wanted to do was play Frisbee every day. And like every kid, we all had a Guinness Book of World Records.
Oh yeah. I even remember that when I was coming up, you know, that's what all the kids wanted to check out at the library, at the school.
I mean, so back before the internet, you aside from, you'd have fictional books as a kid that you read, but you'd have maybe the Encyclopedia Britannica, maybe this thing called the Book of Lists, which gave a bunch of lists of top 10 largest countries or something.
Okay.
And you Guinness Book of World Records. And that was almost the only nonfiction you would have that was popularly available. So everybody had a Guinness Book of World Records on their shelf. I mean, everybody. And so here's this book. Everybody wanted to be in it. And I played Frisbee. So that's the only record that was in the book. So yeah, so I was, that was my dream.
So tell me about going for that dream. Tell me about how you went from posting the flag to actually becoming world record holder.
Yeah, well, I was obsessed with it. I wanted to be the best in the world at something. And I wrote about this a lot in my book because I evolved a lot as a person throughout my life, especially in my youth.
Sure.
I don't think when I was younger that my motives were the purest. Like having the world record could mean that I could rub your nose in it, basically.
Okay.
Or tell you that I was better than you, or it was good for my low self-esteem at the time. But I wanted to be the best in the world at something. And you could quantify that. That was not, you had the world record. Even if the world record was you could smoke 110 cigarettes at once or whatever. There was that picture of the guy with a mouthful. It doesn't matter. He was the best in the world at that thing. So I just wanted to be better than everybody in the world at something.
Yeah.
I trained, and we didn't think of it as training back then, but we would just go out and throw and throw and throw. And I won the world distance. Well, I set the world junior distance record in 1987. And I remember not even caring at the time. It was the world record, but it's like, that's not the one that goes in the Guinness book. That's not the record.
Gotcha.
And then I won the world distance championships in 1991, or excuse me, 1990. Yeah, it was 1991. What am I saying? Of course, 1991. I won the world distance. That was my first world title. And that was great. That was a big moment for me, but I still wanted the world record. So when I set the world record in 1995, that was as far as my disc golf career, setting the record for the first time, that was probably the single biggest moment of my Frisbee career on the course. It wasn't even on the course. It wasn't disc golf, but that was probably my biggest moment.
Gotcha. And funny enough, I posted today, I know you saw it. I posted, I'm going to be talking to world record holder, known for his sidearm, and guess who it is? And, posted a couple of different people. Well, everyone knew it was you.
Yeah,
So
I
even
know.
in, so even in 2020, everybody, can pick out your name in a list of names and saying that's a world record holder. And that's a guy known for his
Yeah.
sidearm.
So here's the funny thing about that. So the sidearm record, because I set that record in 2000 or 2001. I set the sidearm world distance record, and I could have broken it for like 10 years. Like I never cared about it. That's not the record. The record was the backhand record. So I never even tried for it before. And so I broke my own record in 1998. And then in 2000, Chris Vogt from Germany, very good friend of mine, he was a peer of mine. He was really, really good. And I was standing out in the desert and right about at my world record mark, and I watched him throw a disc over my head, which meant he broke my record. And at this point, my back had, I wasn't competitive. I mean, I was not that I wasn't competitive, but I had lost 10%, but enough where I wasn't going to beat him anymore. He had passed me. That's the way it happens in sports, right?
Right.
So he broke that record, and I had 5 throws left in the tournament. And I said, well, I'm not going to waste those throws on trying to throw this. I'm not going to beat him today. But I go, well, there is the sidearm distance record, and I guess I could always just get that. So I threw the sidearm distance record, which I just never even tried for before, and so I set the sidearm record. And then the interesting thing was that was in 2000 or 2001. I took 13 years off. And when I came back to the sport, people are like, oh, yeah, you're the guy with the sidearm record. I'm like, well, I used to. And they're like, no, you still have it. I'm like, what? Like, that never even occurred to me that nobody had broken it in 13 years. I mean, I assume someone would have.
Well, an interesting thing that I think we disc golfers take for granted that you really, hammered in your book was that initially the sidearm was kind of like cheating in disc golf. A lot of people did not think the sidearm belonged in the sport.
It was a trick shot. Well, not to everybody. I mean, but there were people that called it, they referred to it as a trick shot. People had mentioned that it shouldn't be allowed. Of course, there's people that can't use it, right? But
yeah, always.
But the thing that I never ever want to leave off the conversation was I didn't invent this throw.
Right.
Right. Victor, I mean, well, first off, the first person to buy a flying disc probably tried it sidearm. But Victor Malafronte and Ken Westerfield are the two people that they get the credit for that throw. Like, they were the first to master that throw. Right. For sure. And it just kind of fell out of popular competition. And part of the reason why is there didn't used to be overstable discs. So you had to throw an understable disc, and that takes a whole different skill level than an overstable disc. Overstable disc, you could learn to throw sidearm pretty easily, pretty quickly, and then you might get good at it. But if you've never thrown a sidearm before and you're throwing an understable disc, you might have a hard time.
Yeah, but now it's something that not everybody has, but is definitely needs to be part of the bag. And I saw an interview with you. It was either a video interview or I read something where you were talking about hole number 17 at USDGC and how that, is a quintessential sidearm hole.
You would never miss that. You would never miss that fairway with the sidearm. I mean, barring bad conditions, but yeah, I mean, you could do that in your sleep. If you took a mirror image of that.
Wait, you could do it in your sleep. I'd probably throw 3 in the water. But yeah, go ahead.
But I guess what I mean is if you took a complete mirror image of that hole, every single player in that tournament who's right-handed could throw a backhand onto the green 9.7 out of 10 times. The green gets really large. So to get next to the basket, you're actually risking a little bit of OB. That's missable. But the green gets, if it's not a mirror image, if you go off to the right, there is such a huge landing area if you're playing that hole for 3 that you would virtually never miss that hole if you had a sidearm.
Right. It kind of opens up as you move further from the basket.
Yeah. And so playing that hole for 3, you could just do all day. It's not hard. But with the backhand, it's actually, you got to flip a disc up. That takes more skill. And you have to hit your line better. It's a harder shot.
So I want to talk to you because you mentioned earlier about an earlier version of you and a newer version of you. And I think it's important to kind of discuss that and try to, if you could try to walk me through your evolution as a human being and as a disc golfer. I think that's really interesting. In your earlier part of your book, you're very critical of the younger you. Actually, you're very accepting of the younger you. And how you used to respond to things. And me being an author of Zen and the Art of Disc Golf and writing a lot about the mental game, I think would be an interesting place to go to talk about your evolution from somebody who carried a lot of anger and to somebody who, let me see what I have here. I read an interview with you and it said, the other part is that I never get upset when I'm playing. I don't get upset. I don't get angry. I don't get stressed out. I just don't exist in that space. So what kind of happened in your world that you went from just two extremes?
Yeah. And so I have gotten upset on the course one time in the last 20 years, but I was upset at another player for their behavior.
Yeah. And you qualified that in the book as well.
Yeah. So I want to be very clear because I don't want to like someone call me on and say, no, we were at that tournament. We saw you upset. Now I was really pissed off at somebody for what they were doing. So basically, yeah, when I was a kid, I was just angry. And I don't know why. To this day, I have no idea why, because I had every advantage a kid could have. Like you make a list. I had it all. There was no reason for me to be angry, but I was just angry. And when I've left the sport twice. And so when I was 18 years old, 18-ish around there, I left the sport for like a year and a half. I still would play once in a while at that time, but I got away from the sport to pursue what I thought was a career, selling drugs, basically. And my high school guidance counselor didn't recommend that career, but I got away from disc golf. And then when that things happened and that world kind of fell apart, my Frisbee and disc golf family were there welcoming me back in. And it's hard to describe what happened other than I just decided I wanted to be happy. Like I liked being the bad boy as a kid. I liked making people mad. And I liked, I don't know, it's hard to describe because I liked making people angry. I really enjoyed it. But at the same time, that made me less happy when they didn't like me. Try to explain that. I don't know how to explain it, except I can tell you both things existed in the same space.
I think youthful anger is sort of a normal part of growing up. And you mentioned earlier, the punks and the skaters and all that kind of stuff. And I was a young punk. I was in punk rock bands and things like that. As a matter of fact, somebody wanted me to just talk to you about punk rock music. I don't even know if you're into punk rock music, but
So
I'm sorry.
Very much so.
Awesome. Who's your favorite?
A band called Baldo Rex out of Colorado, but
okay.
pop. I like a lot of the Op Ivy, No FX, Rancid, the early '90s kind of skate punk. But I also like hardcore and I like the historical stuff. I like it all.
Awesome. I was gonna say, Bad Brains, Black Flag, Minor Threat. That was my school.
My best friend who's from DC played with Bad Brains.
Nice.
Yeah, he grew up in punk bands and he played with all those and Ian Mackay and everybody. He like knew those guys growing up.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But I do think punk is sort of a display of youthful anger, and it doesn't seem to matter where you came from, as far as what you had or what you didn't have.
Yeah.
It's just this natural, I don't know, just sense of disobedience that we just seem to have at a certain age of, when we're beginning to mature.
Yeah. Well, and that's what it is. I mean, a lot of the punk rock scene came out of the suburbs and you're like, well, why could you be angry? You're in the suburbs. Well, the punk community in the suburbs recognized everything that was awful about the suburbs. You know,
Yeah.
my town that I grew up in was very conservative. It was very racist. It was very materialistic. It was everything that I hated about society. And so I was very pissed off at that. But again, it's a weird irony, because I also, like, how hard was my life really? Go complain to the kids in the hood about how rough it is trying to keep up with the Joneses on my cul-de-sac.
Sure.
Right. I mean, my God, my life wasn't hard, but I wasn't living their life. I lived mine, and I hated mine.
Sure. So at some point, because that's where this kind of conversation started, we digressed into punk rock, which it was a special request from a fan. But at some point, you evolved into this new human being, and I've talked to other people who have worked with you, or I talked to one gentleman who had caddied for you at one point and just referred to you as one of the nicest human beings he's ever met. So in my experience with you, though it has all been purely digital, it's been through Zoom and through the cell phone, as a very caring person, especially when we talk about the blue power that you orchestrate. And I'd like to go into that just a little bit in just a minute. But how did you evolve to that as a human, and how do you feel like it impacted your game?
So have impacted my game. So it's real interesting. So the way I evolved to it, I just wanted to be happy, and I just actually put some effort into figuring out how, and all the things I needed to do to be happy came together. And I wrote about it in my book. I think I listed like 9 different things, but it was just acknowledging that I wanted to be happy. And one of the philosophies I've had in life is, if somebody has something that I want, I try to figure out how to get it. And I don't mean that materialistically. What I mean is, if somebody is financially successful, well, what are they doing? If somebody's happy, what are they doing? If somebody has a good relationship, how are they doing it? If somebody's being a good parent, how do they do it? And so I saw people that were happy, and I just emulated them, which was the DDC community and the Frisbee community. So I want to be like these people. They're way happier than me.
So you had some significant role models.
Very much. Doing it independently on my own, or being surrounded by people who were cancer, I would not have come out of it.
And one of the things that is very profound about your book is the amount. So let me put it this way, and I've said this in my writing before. Anytime you go on and do something, you go out on a limb and do something, whether it's going out and joining and going to a tournament for your first time, whether it's starting a podcast, whether it's starting a blog or writing a book, you're always putting yourself on a limb. And there's a certain amount of vulnerability that comes with that. I've put out 3 disc golf books now, and I'm not on the PDGA tour. You always have that. And I wrote about this in my new book, and part of the mindset is called The Bully. And the bully always wants to tell you 2 things. Who wants to ask, who do you think you are? And you're not good enough. Those are the 2 things that our internal bullies want to tell us all the time. But I forgot where I was going with this. But those are some of the things that I wrote in my book. So you're always going out on a limb when you try something new, when you go on a venture, when you open up a business, like you've opened up so many businesses, when you create a disc line like you've created, you're always doing something vulnerable. But the information that you've put in this book about your personal history, it is so vulnerable. What's it like to have that out as public knowledge now?
That's better to me. That is not being vulnerable. That is the safest position to be in, because nobody has anything on me.
Gotcha.
Now, I've actually finished the first draft of my next book, because my autobiography is a trilogy. The first book ends when I retired in 2000. The next book's is about the 13 years when I was gone. And you ain't heard nothing yet.
Well, that's funny, because I watched your first podcast and you kind of gave, your trajectory. And as I was reading the book, I'm like, well, we haven't gotten to this whole section that he talked about in his podcast.
Nope. I'm going to be doing it. The book is in 3 parts, or the story's in 3 parts, because I did nothing but disc golf minus a quick detour when I was younger. until 2001. And then I left disc golf for 13 years. That's a whole separate story. And then I found disc golf in 2014 again.
Right.
And that's a whole separate story. So it didn't make sense for it to be in one book. And I didn't want to write a 700-page autobiography. It just seemed that wasn't right.
Right.
But 3 separate stories. But you have to think about it is, to me, being open is not being vulnerable. That's safe.
Okay.
Especially when I write the second book, what do you have on me?
Right.
What are you going to do? Like this, like you're going to dig up something on me? Like, no, I wrote about it in my book. And I don't know. To me, it's just so safer. Secrets are vulnerable.
Oh, yeah. I like, that's a good quote. That's a good quote.
Okay. I should write a book. No, but it's empowering, and it also connects to people. And I also want to help people. And if I can connect to people, or people can connect to my story, that's how I can help them. If I'm not honest, I can't do anything for anybody.
Sure.
And, that's just, I don't know how to be any other way. Like, if you ask me a question right now, I'll answer you.
Yeah, you've done good so far.
Yeah, if you ask a deep personal question, I would just tell you the truth and then let the chips fall. I just don't care. And my friends and the people that I love and my family love me, and that's not going to change.
That's a good place to be. That's definitely a good place to be.
I'm not vulnerable. You're only vulnerable what if people find this thing out about me? I would never want to live in that space.
Yeah, I hear
now,
you.
Let me rephrase that. If you've had a normal, pretty generic life where things have gone well, then you don't have secrets. That's maybe a different story, but I've had ups and downs. And so I'm just, it's all out there for the world. Sure. I'm okay with it.
All right, let's change speeds real quick. Let's talk about the Blue Power thing and how you got involved with the special needs and autism community in part 1 of this podcast, which exists on Scott Stokely's YouTube. Head on over to that. We talked a lot about it. I don't have to talk so much about it, but we can kind of just touch base on it because I think it's important, especially between you and I and our relationship. Once we talk about that, I want to give my listeners some takeaways from you, and then we'll see where it goes.
Okay. So what got me into the special needs community is I was in a relationship with a woman who had a son with autism, a grown son with autism. And she struggled. We didn't work out as a couple, but I respect her 100% as a mom. I saw what was hard for her. And so initially, and I'm honest with everything, initially I didn't have any altruistic motives. I thought if I started doing special needs or autism-based events, I was doing it for her. I just wanted to do something special for her and show her that I loved her, and I wanted to make her happy. I wasn't really doing it for the community. And I don't think those are bad motives, by the way, but I'm also just being honest. Some people want to paint themselves in this light of, putting themselves on a pedestal. It's like, no, I was trying to impress a girl. I'm sorry.
It has a way of guiding you in a certain direction where your skill sets will be most valuable. And it sounds like that's how you got there, kind of like me with writing. Like I get told that the books that I've written help people. Mm-hmm. And who would have known that, just me going out and play disc golf every day and doing something, this, something I never thought would sell. So life and the universe and God all have some kind of weird way of getting you to the place where your skill sets are most valuable to society.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened was that once I started doing this, it didn't take long before I started to enjoy it for itself. And then it started to mean something to me. And then next thing you know, it mattered. And then this community mattered. And I started getting emails and, a lot of Facebook and YouTube comments, but I would get emails and letters from parents of people, of kids and adults with special needs. And then that mattered to me a lot. And I started to identify myself with that was who I am and what I was getting out of it. And, I jokingly say that I had very selfish motives for all of it. I did. It made me feel good. And you're not supposed to, that's another thing. You're not supposed to say that. And it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. You're doing good things because it makes you feel good. You're somehow less, I don't know, less something than somebody who claims to be an altruist. No, I'm sorry. It made me feel good to do good things. And it made me want to do more good things because I wanted to keep feeling good.
Well, that, and often they say that the cure for depression is to go out and do something for somebody else because it makes you feel good. And
yeah, for sure.
I don't see it, just like you, I don't see anything wrong with getting personal pleasure for doing things for other people. There's worse things you could do.
No, I actually believe I've gone on my soapbox on this before. I like to get on my soapbox. I'm going to have to build a podcast, but I don't care what your motive is for doing good things. If you're sitting in church and they announce that, and by the way, I've only been to church like twice in my life, but I know how church works. If you're sitting in church and someone says, hey, this family's house burned down, they could use a donation. And if the person next to you throws $100 bill in the basket, and the reason they're doing it is because they're trying to show off that they can afford to give $100, I don't care that that's their motives. They put more money in there than they would have otherwise. It's irrelevant to me. What matters is the family got $100. I don't care why you do good things. If you're doing good things, do them. So my reasons were, I love the community. I always want to help the community. I always have time for the community. I give them myself dearly. They matter to me, but I like to feel good about myself. I like to value myself as a human being at the same time. I think both things can exist.
Sure. Absolutely.
So that's when I started running these events, and they ended up not being for the kids with autism or special needs. It was as much directed towards the family as anything. It was about giving the siblings something they can do with the kid brother. It was about giving the parents a place they could go with their child where they would be welcome, which is the local disc golf course or club. It's about an activity that a child with special needs can do. So it was about all those things, but it was never just about the person with special needs. It was about their entire family.
Right.
And I thought disc golf was great for that.
And for those of you just tuning in just to this podcast and they didn't have a chance to go over to your podcast, Scott and I connected based on special needs, his outreach for special needs. I had already decided that I was going to do this podcast and that I was going to reach out and try to find some guests. And it just so happened that, I don't know, Scott had a book and I had a book, and I was like, okay, well, we could both talk about writing about, disc golf. Oh, look, he's big in the special needs community. And if you watch either his podcast or the other podcast that's dropping on this same day where I talk to my wife, you know that my son has autism. And that's one of the reasons I kind of disappeared from the scene for a little while. And so when I reached out to Scott, I said, we have to talk. And it was based on our connection to both disc golf and autism. So I think what you're doing is great, Scott. And I can't wait to get Bryce to one of your clinics, and maybe I could learn something too.
Well, those are two different. So yeah, they're two different clinics. Yeah. It's also just fun to do this. The special needs community is great, but I have a lot of fun with it. And I get to be 100% myself. I haven't changed who I am at all. Can I share a funny story?
Please do.
Okay, this is an awful story. This is going to make a percentage of your audience. They're not going to
stop right now. We're going to go to an ad. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
No, I'm going to give you an idea of just about having fun. It wasn't about autism. It was about someone who was blind. And if you haven't heard this story, this is just an example of what I'm trying to do. The reason for this story is I want to share that you do not have to have a 501c3. You don't have to have something formal. You don't need training. You can just do something, and you're going to do it right. So my first special needs class, my first Blue Power event, I advertised. No one showed up. So that one was really easy. I didn't know. And the next one, I did a special needs event, and it just said special needs, and 3 people showed up. And I was there. So at these events, the way I did this was that they weren't fundraisers. I ran 20 actually charity events back east where like 30 or some percentage, I forget, of the money actually went to the Francisco Racker Center. But early on, they weren't fundraisers. I was running I would do a pro clinic and I would do doubles afterwards. And that's how I was making my living. And hey, I'm also offering a special needs class before. So I advertised special needs class an hour before the main clinic. 3 people show up: a kid with autism, high functioning, an adult who was low functioning autism, and blind Mike. And blind Mike was a local player. He was part of the local club who just happened to be blind. But blind Mike had been playing for, I don't know exactly, but 10 or 20 years. And the guy was legitimately a good, talented disc thrower. He just couldn't see. So I didn't know what I was doing in my clinics, and we ended up playing 3 holes of disc golf as I was trying to teach him how to play. I hadn't formulated the scarecrow technique or anything. I was brand new at this, just winging it. And on the very first hole we played, we step up to the tee pad. The only way Mike can throw, I call him Blind Mike because that's his name. His name's not Mike. It's Blind Mike because he's a club member. So Blind Mike says, "Here, can you point where the basket is?" So I stand him on the tee pad, grab his hand, and I point towards the target. Now this is his course. He can't play other courses, but he knows that on his course, on hole 1, it's 270 feet, and there's a tree on the right with a limb hanging over. You got to get under it. I mean, he knows his course. So he steps up with good form, throws his drive in the circle.
Wow.
Blind Mike. Right.
Nice. Yeah.
So I said, I'm like I was blown away, of course, like anybody would be. So we go up there, we go up to his lie, and you're walking him along up to his lie. You get up to his lie and he says, "Can you ring the chains?" And I ring the chains and I say, "Yeah, you're about 25 feet. And he turns his head to me. He goes, "Yeah, I can tell."
Nice.
Because he was triangulating with his ears.
Sure, yeah.
Without having to, like, he turned his head, which was kind of eerie because he turned his head to face me when he said it. But he turns his head to face me and goes, "Yeah, I can tell." And read the chains, he turned back towards the target, but was still spatially aware of where the target is. He didn't have to reset or anything. He lines up, he putts, he hits metal and misses.
Okay.
The next hole, he throws it in the circle, throws his putt in for a 2. The third hole we played, he throws it in the circle again, hits metal and misses. So Blind Mike goes par, birdie, par.
Nice.
Yeah. And
better
I'm
than
like,
me.
he had good form. I mean, he probably threw 350 or something off the tee. I mean, he was good.
Wow.
Right? So anyways, yeah. So I thought that was really neat. So then we do, the 2, the kid and adult with autism, they took off, but Blind Mike kind of hangs out. I do the regular clinic and then he plays doubles, and it's random draw doubles. And as can happen in random draw doubles, I got paired up with a new player. He got paired up with the best guy in town. I didn't play so hot, and long story short, they win.
Okay.
Fair and square. I didn't tank. I didn't throw it. It's disc golf. It's sports. It's doubles. He won. Beat me fair and square. And I'm like, shit, how am I gonna write about this on my Facebook page? Like, because I don't know how to, this is all new to me. I don't know how to approach this. And I said, well,
remember, no secrets. Secrets are vulnerability.
Exactly. So what I said is, I go, well, with anyone with physical disabilities, all I've ever heard, I hadn't been exposed that much in my life, but all I'd ever heard is we want to be treated like everybody else. That's all we want. Not developmental. That's a whole different ballgame. But physical, we want to be treated like everybody else. And I said, all right. I thought it over. I said, all right, well, I'm going to post to my Facebook page and I'm going to shit all over him. And I'm going to rip on him, and I'm going to treat him like a man, because he is a man, right? So I'm going to treat him like everybody else. And so I sit down at the keyboard and I post, "Yeah, I ran the event today and I got beat by a blind guy. It was the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me." I think I even said something like, "He's not even a whole man," or something. I mean, I was.
Oh my gosh.
No, I'm telling you, your viewers are clicking off at this point. And I write this thing out and I'm like,
please, he's going to bring it back around. I know Scott well enough now. He's going to bring it back around.
I can't post this. There's no way I can post this. And then I'm like, oh, but he's going to love it because I'm going to treat him like everybody else. He's not expecting this. And I'm like, oh, but I can't. There's no way people. And finally I said, you know what? He's going to like it. I know he will, because his friends are going to tell him about it. So I hit post, and I kid you not, unfriend, unfriend, unfriend. And somebody posted, I'll never forget their exact words. They wrote, there is a special place in hell for people like you. I got that on my post, and I was like, this was a bad idea. And then I get a message immediately from one of his friends. They said, he hasn't stopped laughing. I remember the exact words, but basically what he said was, his friend said, thank you for so much for not saying he's inspirational. Whenever he hears he's inspirational, he throws up in his mouth.
Oh, wow. See,
okay,
he brought
so
it back around. He brought it back around.
So I said, so Mike got it. And I left it up. I said, I stand by this. So and by the way, I've now taken that. I've now done the exact same thing to other players with physical disabilities, and I've yet to meet one who didn't appreciate it, even if the people around didn't. I don't care about them. I care about the player that came to my clinic. So anyways, that's the purpose of that story is that like this stuff is fun. Does not have to be formal. It doesn't have to be rigid. You don't have to get it right. Just go out and do it, and you'll succeed at this. Like whatever this thing is, like if you're trying to do good, it's going to end good.
Yeah, that's good message for, I think, anybody, disc golf or you know, or not, you know, anything that anybody's doing in their life. That's a great message. Well,
Yeah,
Scott, I know we've been talking for quite a while. I do want to give my listeners a quick takeaway, and
sure.
then we'll call it a night, but I hope we don't stop talking.
No.
So I'd like to begin to end my podcast with a takeaway that players can take away if they're new or intermediate, that kind of goes into something maybe that you've said before or something that we were learning about the sport. And one of the things that you said in your In the Bag video, I think is really neat, and I think people need to hear it. And it's slowest disc possible. Are you familiar when I say that? Can you tell my listeners about your philosophy on playing the slowest disc possible before we leave tonight?
Sure. It's real simple. I'm going to just throw out made up numbers. So ignore don't do the math, because it is not going to line up, but you'll get the idea, the concept. So the idea of the slowest disc possible is you want to throw a shot that has the largest margin for error, or the smallest margin for error, the one that benefits you the most. It always gets worded both ways. So basically, imagine you have a 150-foot hole, and you have two discs. You have a putter and a driver. And if you throw them both the exact right power, they're both going to land by the basket. Okay, good shots land where they're supposed to. However, if you throw that driver 10% too hard, it goes 30 feet long. You throw the putter 10% too hard, it goes 12 feet long. So what that means is that same 10% too much power, because we're human, we're going to make physical errors when we throw, that 10% too much power penalizes you far more on a driver than it does on a putter. The slower disc doesn't require you to be as perfect. The same thing holds true if you throw a steep angle shot. A flat shot is going to carry farther. 10% will go X amount farther. Throw that same shot with a steep hyzer angle, and that 10% harder will not go as far past the target. Now you can argue it has a squirrely landing. It's not flat. I'm not suggesting that's automatically best, but the same philosophy applies to throwing a hyzer versus a flat shot. So the slowest disc to reach the hole, generally speaking, as a general rule, is the correct throw. Awesome.
I can't argue that any better. I actually remember how I said that when you read a book, and this might've been in the other podcast, I'm mixing them now. When you read a book, you're looking for certain takeaways. And one of those are, this is new information that I'm going to use, or this is information I've been doing. Hey, that's correct. So when I heard you say that, I was like, yeah, I wrote about that in the Strategy and Tactics book. Try to use the slowest disc possible to get where you want to be. It's just going to stick better.
Yeah, you want to, you can't argue with math. Math trumps everything. So math and probabilities and geometry and physics, I mean, those things trump any subjective idea as far as what thing you should do on the course. I mean, math will trump. So the math works to throw a slower disc. By the way, this happens all the time. Players who don't have a good sidearm will throw a driver on a 100-foot shot because they don't know how to control a slow disc. Figure out how to throw a slow disc. Don't be throwing your Firebird on a 130-foot sidearm approach shot. It's bad idea for the exact.
To get that spin on it, and then it just kicks.
You just have to be perfect with those discs. You don't have to be perfect. That is why, and I'm not trying to plug a manufacturer, but I like the Berg. Berg is my favorite disc in my bag, is because the Berg is the slowest disc that I've ever thrown. It doesn't fly.
What is it, like a 1100 or something like that?
Oh God, it's like it's just actually I don't know what numbers it is. It's barely a flying disc. But you can throw the Berg. If you throw it the right power on a 100-foot shot, it's going to land by the target. If you throw it way too hard, it flies like 102 feet.
Right.
It just goes just drops out. So a huge fan of the Berg for that reason. I'm a better finesse player today than I ever was in my life, and the Berg is the reason.
Right on. Well, Scott, I appreciate you talking to me now for, I guess it's going to be 3 hours. We'll probably be trimmed down for podcast. Well, we started at 8. It's almost 11 o'clock.
All right. Well, if you cut that story out about the clinic, you can.
No, I don't think I will. Because you brought it around.
No, again, the reason I like that story is I don't want to be put on a pedestal. I don't want to be blown up for anything more. I'm just being me and having fun. And you can do these other things too. It's not a trade-off.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to do with this podcast, and it's very different than the last podcast, basically with the season 1 back in 2015, 2016 of the Zen Disc Golf podcast was 30 episodes. And there was 3 co-hosts. It was myself, Zach Englehart, 3 other co-hosts. There was 4 hosts. It was hard to figure out when you were going to talk, but it was myself, Zach Englehart, Chris Bowden of DG Puttheads, and Tim Stewart of Mind Body Disc. So a big shout out to those guys. Love those guys. They help propel me. But then we would bring somebody in and they'd only get like 15 or 20 minutes to talk. I wanted to do with this podcast, I wanted long form conversations. Doesn't have to be rigid. Doesn't have to be an hour. We finish when we finish. End of story. So I'm not going to be cutting stuff just to be cutting stuff. If you call me up tomorrow morning and you say, hey, I've been thinking about it, let's go ahead and cut that story, I'll think about it. I'm just kidding.
I am very proud of that story. If people don't get it, I think that the people that I think the people that I want to hear that story will get what it meant. And the people that don't get it, if they're upset by it, they really don't get what just happened. People don't get me. I'm used to that.
Well, I can't plug your book enough. I'm not done with it. I'm most of the way done with it. It's been hard to put down. And I'm honored that when you go to Amazon and you click on Scott Stokely's Growing Up Disc Golf, it almost always says down below, most often sold with Zen and the Art of Disc Golf, or the complete Zen.
Perfect. Love it.
Zen Disc Golf. How else can we help you? How else can we end this? How else can we plug you? Your website?
Can't do anything to help me. I don't take donations for Blue Power. I've never accepted a donation. If you want to do something for autism financially, I encourage you to donate locally, but I do this for different reasons. So you cannot support Blue Power financially. The big thing is just listen to my podcasts and listen to my tutorial videos and follow me in social media. I got some cool stuff coming out this year. Like I can't say, but there's some big things happening in the world of disc golf that I'm a part of that are happening as we speak. And you'll hear about them.
Well, I'm excited to hear about them. So to listen to your podcast, I know you're on YouTube. Is that where you want everybody to go? Are you on Apple? And
I'm on everywhere. So
awesome.
Yeah, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, I think. Just all the major platforms. It's everywhere.
Okay, right on. So yeah, definitely go check out that. I'm excited to see what you got coming up with. And I think our chemistry has been so well. I hope we remain friends for a long time.
So yeah, we'll see you too. I'll be in Virginia again. I'll go back up to Newport.
New Quarter. You can come beat the pants off me.
Deal.
And talk crap the entire time. I'm bringing Tommy Brosom. I want you to talk crap to him too.
Okay, yeah, we'll bring him out. Well, like I said, I'll give him some bad advice, and you'll beat him all the time.
Scott, I appreciate you so much. Hope you have a wonderful night, and Happy New Year, sir.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you too. Enjoy. Thank you. Give your wife a hug and give Bryce a hug.
Thank you so much. And thanks all y'all for watching or listening to the Zen Disc Golf Podcast.